PowerPlayChess, brought to you in association with Ghasi. An old mate of mine, Joe Gallagher, showed me this game of his the other day, and it features a theme that we've been discussing on the channel over the past few weeks. I'm not going to say any more than that. There's a fascinating position in it, and I'm going to ask you a tricky question later on, so watch out for that. So this game, Joe Gallagher playing white against Ghasi, played in 2003 in the 4NCL, which is the British Team Championship. Joe Gallagher, Grandmaster, former British champion and Swiss champion, and he's playing against Ghasi, who, well, he was very young when this game was played, but he subsequently became an international master. Very talented player, actually, but never became a professional. Now, it's a Sicilian, an open Sicilian. And knight b5. Now, very often this leads into a Sveshnikov after d6, bishop f4, and then bishop g5, and so on. That's a Sveshnikov variation. But the other way of playing this for black is bishop b4, and that was played here by Amit. And this has a reputation as being a very solid line, or at least in the past, a very solid line. Joe plays the old main line with a3 and then d5. So it's very classical. Black strikes in the centre. I say it always had the reputation of being a solid line, but recently, if you're interested in playing this, then you will have to contend with this move, bishop f4. Very trendy. And then all hell breaks loose. Knight c7 check, and then you can either castle queenside or just take the rook, and that is mad. Absolutely mad positions. Very interesting stuff. Anyway, Joe stuck with the traditional main line. So, a very regular position. White has two bishops, but black has played very classically in the centre with d5. And Joe took on d5, which is, I guess, the main line. You can also play bishop d3 to hold the tension. That way this bishop is still blocked in here. The only thing is this endgame, yes, white has the two bishops, but it is very difficult to squeeze an advantage out of this one. Black is going to castle queenside, but maybe that's to your taste, you know. Anyway, Joe goes with the main line, taking on d5 and then bishop d3. Both sides castle and then d4. So this is what makes black's position viable, that black actually has some space. It's an isolated queen's pawn, and it charges forward and gives black some space and has, you know, very free play for the pieces. If knight e4, then bishop e5, and that exchanges more pieces. That's known to be playable for black. So knight e2 and bishop g4. Good move, because there's a pin which just pegs white back a little bit. So the pin is broken, but here we see the idea. And this is, of course, a very, very common maneuver in a lot of openings. You see it in the Caro-Kann exchange variation. You see it in Queen's Gambit positions. This bishop spins round to g6 to counter the bishop on d3. This is the dangerous piece. And if black can exchange that one off, then that's a step forward. Joe goes with b4 and stations bishop on b2 to attack the d pawn. Fair enough. There's another way of playing this which is interesting. I noticed that Anna Muzychuk once played excuse me, knight f4. Bishop came back. Knight takes, pawn takes. So this bishop survives, but you know, you could argue that this is quite a nice pawn structure defending the king. But then Anna played f4 and set up very aggressively like this. I quite like the look of this, actually. You're just really going for it on the king side. For example, the game went like this. And then g4. And already This is an extremely dangerous position. But okay, black could have done better. Anyway, it's just another way of playing. Joe went with b4, which is all very sensible. And the bishop came to b2, so this one is attacked. Queen b6. Yeah, nice position for the queen. And that clears the back rank. So these rooks have nice places. Rook d8. And rook e8. So black is beautifully centralized here. You know, the only thing you could say in white's favour is that these bishops have potential. And, well, on a good day this might be slightly weak, but at the moment that's doing a fantastic job of carving out territory in the middle of the board. Rook d1, yep, so that's Joe's plan to put some pressure here. Knight d5, right, we can see a disadvantage of playing f3, as is so often the case. We need that pawn on f2. And you can see that knight wants to plunge in on the e3 square. So Joe decides, right, got to exchange that one off. Both these pieces are hit, so that gets exchanged. But Amit succeeds in his plan of putting the bishop to g6 to counter that beautiful bishop on d3. So it's all, I think, very logical play from both sides so far. And even, you know, white has to be a little bit careful here with the rook potentially coming in on e3 or perhaps e2 as well later on. So Joe plays bishop c4, preserving the bishop. So that's logical, but then again, this bishop on g6 is a very strong piece too. So rook d7 to guard f7, so now that is a threat. Rook e1 counters on the e-file, so an exchange. So watch out for the back rank mate. So queen d8 covers that and also supports this pawn. And bishop b3 guards that one. So, you know, I think Joe has achieved something there because he's got rid of that marauding knight. The rook looks quite nice on the open file. And these bishops, certainly not bad. Then again, if we switch the position round and look at it from black's viewpoint, well, black has very few weaknesses here. You could say, yeah, the d-pawn is isolated, but very hard to get at that. Black's pieces are very well coordinated. Bishop looks good here. h6 played. Yep, very sensible, giving the king a nice safe square on h7, even covered by the bishop. h3, Joe does the same. And both sides just play their king up the board. Very tidy, both kings very safe. Now, here's my first question for you. If you were playing black, what would you play here? What move are we on? Move 26. So black to play, what would you do? Okay, I'll just have a little slurp tea and you have a little think. Cheers. So black to play. I don't think it's easy for black to achieve much in this position. I think black has to basically just wait here. And most chess players don't like waiting. But this is one of this kind of skills that is so important in chess. In some positions, not all positions, you have to just sit there. So, for example, you could play b5. I mean, it might threaten a5. You could just put your king back on g8 and just wait. You know, there's no harm done there. But Amit played rook e7. He's very keen to exchange pieces. I think, you know, he can see the rook on the open file and understandably wants to exchange off. And he's done a little bit of calculation and he thinks he can get away with this. Right. here is where I'd like you to have your next big think. So it's white to play. What did Joe play here? White to play. Now, in a sense, this is not a stable position because there are captures. There are forcing moves possible here. So when you're calculating, here's a little bit of guidance for you. You should always look at the forcing moves first because it might lead you to something else. So what did Joe play here? Now, as I said at the start of the video, if you've been following videos on the channel over the past couple of weeks, then you'll know that I've been discussing a certain theme or mentioning a certain theme. We had a live broadcast with Natasha Regan and Matt Ball, who've just published a book and a chessable course. I've got the book to hand. There it is again. Zwischenzug, an in-between move, or intermezzo. And that particular tactic features here. Now that's a massive clue for you. A massive clue. White to play. What did Joe play? Joe is an excellent calculator. Right, are you ready? You can always pause the video because it would take time to calculate this one. Okay, here's what Joe played. Rook takes. Now, if knight takes, then the d-pawn falls. No doubt about that. Queen takes. So bishop takes. So these are all forcing moves. Now, if black, passes here, then white is just a pawn up. But Amit had calculated this. Knight takes, queen takes, and now queen c7 check. So white will get out of check, and then black simply takes on c2 with a very even position. I mean, virtually symmetrical pawns, and I imagine that he was thinking the game is about to drift to a draw. But it's here that Joe found a little finesse that just tips the game. This is beautiful. f4, blocking the check. Bishop takes pawn. And Joe had seen one move further than Amit, because this is not an even position. White has a winning move here. Queen e5. Beautiful move, really subtle. Threatening the queen. If queen takes queen, then white has this Zwischenzug, or in fact a Zwischenschach, an in-between move, an in-between check. Check. Gotta get out of check. Pawn takes queen, white is a piece up. So can black get out of this? Well, the queen is attacked. It can step out of the way. It has to step out of the way. But the problem is the queen is overloaded because it has to protect this pawn and it also has to protect this bishop. And it can't do both. So it has to step up and then bishop takes pawn and white has won a pawn. And not only that, white has won a pawn, but it's a very stable position. The queen is beautifully centralized. And, well, Joe converted this position without really any drama at all. Let's just go through how the game finished. Actually, yeah, in this position, white even threatens f5 and bishop g6, and the king is actually in a mating net, so that's why the bishop came back. And very sensibly, Joe does not exchange bishops. Queen and pawn endgames are tricky to win. Much better move, because the bishop not only looks in this direction, but also at those pawns as well. And in combination with that beautifully centralized queen, this is a winning position. So Joe just marks time for a moment. There's actually no rush here. And then goes for it with g4. You have to be absolutely certain when you advance your pawns in front of your king, but actually the king is very safe. And mate threatened on h7. And the king is in trouble. Queen bounces back. Bit of a repetition, and now the king steps up. There's no harm in repeating moves. King g3. Now white just steps up the board. Bishop endgame will be very easy to win with these pawns so weak and an extra pawn. Another check, and that one seems to win material. Yeah, a few checks and game over here. Black resigned. I think it's a beautiful combination. Now, be honest. When we got to this position, did you spot that white was winning a pawn? Because that's what you had to do. But very nice piece of calculation from Joe in that position. But I think the trick to calculation is you keep looking, you keep searching if the position isn't stable. So this is not a stable position. This is not a stable position. That's also not a stable position because there's another check. And here, that's also not a stable position because there are pieces that are on prees, captures are possible. And then that is a beautiful move. And yeah, the Zwischenzug tactic wins for white. Really nice stuff. There you go. I'm sure I'll be looking at more Zwischenzugs over the coming weeks and months. Now that it's in my head, I'm gonna be spotting them absolutely everywhere.